Okay, moving on to the last and final segment of today's show. I wanted to talk about the game that took place on Thursday night between the number 3 ranked Kansas Jayhawks and the number 15 ranked Texas Tech Red Raiders. And if you missed it, Kansas actually ended up winning the game by a final score of 58-57. And this was just such an entertaining game for many different reasons. I wanted to start off by saying this. I will admit, going into the season, I was as low on Kansas as anyone. I thought the fact that they lost Devon Dotson and the fact that they lost Udoka Azubuike would be a little too much, because last year when I watched Kansas, one thing that was really evident to me was that when it was not those two guys creating offense, there wasn't necessarily anyone else on the floor that would be able to get the job done. I love Marcus Garrett. I think he is the best defender in all of college basketball, but he's not necessarily the guy that you're going to ask to not only be your starting point guard and your lead ball handler, but he is also a guy that he's just not really an offensive player. The strength of his game is not going to be scoring 25 points a night. So I was very curious to see who exactly on this Kansas team would be able to do that. And so far before this game, it was Jalen Wilson. The sophomore is a kid that probably has been, I think, the most surprising player in all of college basketball, as he balled out for Kansas against Kentucky. He hit the game-winning shot against Creighton, and he's been really the one Jayhawk that has been super, super consistent throughout the season. And the thing is, in this game, he only had, in 29 minutes, 7 points, 3 rebounds, and 2 assists. And still, even with that being said, even with Kansas's best player really doing nothing throughout the night, somehow, some way, they were able to get the job done and find a way to win. And I got to be honest with you, I totally understand. We all talk about it all the time, right? Bill Self, he cheated to get his players, and he doesn't run a clean program at Kansas. And are those allegations true? Maybe. Has Kansas done everything over the last couple of years that followed each and every one of the rules? Probably not, but that is not what I'm going to be talking about today. What I'm going to be talking about today is, even when you consider the fact that all of those things happened, the whole TJ Gassanola and the Adidas, we all know about it. But even with that being said, Bill Self, no matter what the circumstances, no matter what team he's coaching, no matter what players are on his team, Bill Self always finds a way to win games. It's that simple. I think we take for granted just how impressive the Kansas Jayhawks Big 12 winning streak is. No matter what talent you have, if you're winning all of those Big 12 championships in a row, you could coach. And Bill Self is a really good coach, and he's done a phenomenal job with this Kansas team so far this season. And what really impressed me in this game with Kansas was the fact that, okay, it was a back-and-forth game, we get all that, but it was in Lubbock with fans, and we all know about Texas Tech and what their basketball program has been doing as of late. In a span of 5 years, Chris Beard has literally turned Texas Tech into a program that no one even knew about, totally irrelevant, to all of a sudden one of the premier teams in college basketball. And if you are a upcoming freshman that wants to play college basketball, Texas Tech is going to be one of the places where you want to go. It is a program on the rise, and I totally understand that. But in this game, I got to be honest with you. The fact that Kansas somehow, some way, found a way to win, with Jalen Wilson not playing well, with David McCormick not playing well, and that's a story for another day, is how about Bill Self making the adjustment to the 5-guard lineup? And I think if you watched Kansas, that really worked for them in this game. Self was playing a lineup of Garrett, Braun, Harris, Ajbaji, and Wilson at the 5, and that lineup was really getting the job done for Kansas. And that's another thing I wanted to say about Bill Self. When you look at all this Kansas team, right, and all the different players they have so many different options between Wilson and Ajbaji and McCormick and Garrett, Braun, Harris, Thompson, Lightfoot, and Aruna, Grant Foster. And with all those guys, Bill Self has been able to find a lineup that works. And in this game against Texas Tech, he recognized that, okay, Texas Tech is kind of like us. Their strength is just quick, athletic wings and guards, and they don't really win games with overwhelming size. This isn't the same Texas Tech team as the squad that went all the way to the national championship game a couple years ago. If you remember that team, one of the main reasons why they were so good was because they would play Tariq Owens, because they would play Noren Sodiase, and Bill Self recognized, look, if Texas Tech wants to play small, that's fine. We don't care. We're going to play small also. And the way Ochai Agbaji played throughout the game on Thursday night was just super, super impressive. On a night where, let's face it, Marcus Garrett, he only had 10 points. He wasn't particularly great. Same thing with Jalen Wilson, who we've already spoken about. And then also Christian Braun, a kid that, let's be honest, has been Kansas is really, besides Wilson, one of their most consistent scorers. If you remember earlier this season against St. Joe's, he played in a game and he dropped 30, and he only had 2 points in this game. And I got to be honest with you, throughout the game, there were many moments where it just hit me like, is Christian Braun ready to play in this game? Is the physicality something that he's going to be able to contain? Because there were many times throughout the game that, to be honest, on defense, he just looked lost. But even with that being said, he was one of the main reasons why Kansas actually ended up winning this game, because in the last 30 seconds, Kansas is up by 2, and Terrence Shannon Jr., who was phenomenal for the Red Raiders, he had 20 points in 32 minutes, 9 rebounds. He was phenomenal for Texas Tech. And when Texas Tech is down by 2 late in the game, he just chucks up a 3, and somehow, some way, it goes in. And the fans are going nuts, and Kansas takes the ball down the floor, and it gets poked away, and you think, oh man, is this Texas Tech ball? And then you see the hustle play by Christian Braun to deflect it off of the Texas Tech defender's jersey, and okay, with about 8.3 seconds left, Kansas has the ball, and that's when the mastery of Bill Self comes in. Bill Self is a genius with baseline out-of-bounds plays, and there was a video I retweeted right after the Kansas-Texas Tech game that was just a montage by Jordan Sperber of just perfectly ran inbounds plays by Bill Self in Kansas, and the play that they ran to Agbaji for the win the other night was literally a play that they've been running for years at Kansas. And to be honest, I do think one of the main reasons why the Jayhawks were able to hold on and win this game in the end was flat out because Bill Self just outcoached Chris Beard in the last 5 minutes. And if you listen to this show, you guys know no one loves Chris Beard as much as I do. He's a guy that has really done a great job turning this Texas Tech program around. We all know that somehow, some way, he had the Red Raiders only one win away from the national championship a couple of years ago. And with that being said, Bill Self on the road still was able to get the job done and really outcoach Beard, especially in the last couple minutes of that game. And when you look at Kansas, I got to be honest, the more and more I think about it, the more I realize I was wrong on these guys. And that's okay. They have many different guys that could beat you on any given night. And when you consider how good of a coach Bill Self is, I wouldn't be shocked at all to see Kansas in the Final Four. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see them competing with Baylor, competing with West Virginia at the top of the Big 12. And they are a really good basketball team. And the other thing I liked about this Kansas squad in this game were the top 2 guards off the bench. DeJuan Harris and Bryce Thompson both played really well, and they were both one of the main reasons why Kansas got the dub. DeJuan Harris, you look at the box score, his numbers aren't necessarily going to stand out. In 23 minutes, he had 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 points, but he was one of the main facilitators for the Jayhawks, played great defense, and we all see it sometimes. It's just obvious that Kansas doesn't have that playmaking guard out there. Marcus Garrett is a great defender. We all know that. But let's also face the facts. We also know that he is not the lead ball handler that you necessarily want leading your team. And I do think DeJuan Harris really, even though he didn't score that much, he was really able to cement his impact on the game. And he was one of the main reasons why Kansas won. Another kid I really like, Bryce Thompson. He's another guy. In 14 minutes, he only had 2 points, and he didn't play great in this game against Texas Tech. But in the Creighton game, he was really big for Kansas down the stretch. He played well against Kentucky as well. And when you look at Bryce Thompson, he's a guard that when he's coming off the bench, he could be a big impact guy for Kansas as well. And once again, Bill Self necessarily he didn't necessarily have all of the stars at full strength for him to use in such a tough environment against Texas Tech, but still somehow, some way, he was able to get the job done. And Kansas really did show me something going on the road to Texas Tech. If you listen to the show for long enough, you guys will know that that's kind of how I judge college basketball teams. If you could show me that you have the ability to go on the road and crush a team's soul and take the heart of your opponents out of their soul, just like Kansas did with Texas Tech the other night, that shows me that you're just a mentally tough basketball team. And that is exactly what Kansas was able to do the other night against Texas Tech. And when you look at the Jayhawks, I think they're in a very good spot going forward. The only loss they have had this season was to Gonzaga, and they were able to put up 90 points. They only lost by 12. Gonzaga's offense is just impossible to stop. And then since then, Kansas has been winning game after game, beating St. Joe's, beating Kentucky, beating Washburn, beating North Dakota State, beating Creighton, beating Omaha, beating Texas Tech. And then the next two games for Kansas are going to be very interesting, both at home, but against some of the better teams in the Big 12. Tomorrow night, West Virginia against Kansas. Saturday at 12, Texas against Kansas. I will really be looking forward to both of those matchups. They'll be really exciting. And I'm curious to see what these Jayhawks do going forward, because the Kansas Jayhawks are a perfect example of, okay, if I'm not high on a team in the preseason, that's fine. They still will always find a way to get the job done, thanks to Bill Self and his great coaching ability. And I do think he showed that against Texas Tech. If you have an elite coach, you could win. And I do think that Bill Self showed that against Texas Tech when his team wasn't even necessarily playing the best basketball they could. And that's the scary thing, man. This Kansas team is just going to keep on getting better and better and better. And a lot of people will say, oh, Bill Self, he's always struggled to win the big one. He only has one national championship at Kansas since 2008. And I get it. That's true. Has Bill Self struggled a little bit in the tournament? Yes, I totally understand that. Kansas has had, over the last couple of years, some unacceptable March Madness losses. You remember against Oregon, remember against Villanova, those were both games that Kansas should have won, and that's how they should have made the Final Four. But at the same time, what I will say is this. Kansas, over the last couple of years, has made a Final Four. Bill Self beat Duke and Coach K in an Elite Eight game only a couple of years ago. You guys remember that, right? 2 years ago, Kansas, they lost Gerald Vick. They lost Udoka Azubuike. That team was really good, but, injuries got up to them. And then last year, before the season shut down, Kansas was in a very good spot to win a Natty chip. They were going to be one of the favorites going into March Madness. And then this year, they're right back to being a top team in the Big 12 and playing great basketball. So I just wanted to say, even though we all know Bill Self is a Hall of Fame coach and he gets hate for, apparently how he's bringing in recruits, and I don't necessarily know how Bill Self is bringing in recruits, but look at some of the other prime examples of coaches who have had talent brought to their campus illegally, aka Mark Gottfried, or some of the other coaches that have paid players to come in the past. Those teams aren't always good. If you remember, Mark Gottfried did that with Dennis Smith Jr. at NC State, and they couldn't win anything. And now, Bill Self, he has talent, and even with that being said, he's able to execute with it and take advantage of that talent. And straight up, that is something that not every coach in college basketball could do. So Bill Self and the Jayhawks deserve a lot of credit, and Kansas will be a team I'll be having my eye on going forward.